I mean, I think although being the artistic director, it's really a public task, and one certainly bears a certain responsibility to create a certain survey or cross-section of general practice of what's happening around the world. But I think it's inevitable that one will try to, in some ways, it'll be a self-reflection of one's own interests. You know, so history is certainly one of our own interests, and I think a lot of the architects we invited are not only do we respect their work tremendously or respect the prospect of their work, but we also think they're intellectuals in a way that could address the notion of history. So we established this thematic of making new history, but we didn't specify what type of history and where this history comes from. And we basically were hoping that the architects or the participants would have their own interpretation of it, which we did. Which there are a lot of unexpected things that happened. And so we're really happy with how it turned out. We're still in the process of digesting many of the responses. Yeah. I mean, indeed, I think for us, history is always there. You know, certainly we look back in the history of modern architecture, history came back in different guises. You know, certainly we think that happened a lot in Italy, from Novecento to Tendenza later, America, to postmodernism, post-war reconstruction by the T10, you know, so it comes back at different moments. But we thought at this moment it was very different because with this information age, everything is accessible, you know, so everything is flatline, everyone can have access to everything. And history for us becomes not so much something like a straitjacket that ties you down or conforms you to something, but history becomes a structure that makes sense of all this plethora of images and information that's out there. It gives us a certain structure. So it ceases to be a remedy for maybe high modernist orthodoxy that the postmodernists use it for, nor something that gives a certain structure to conform architecture. But we thought it's something that people really desire as a crude knowledge that happened over time. You know, so this is what we believe in all the time, but we don't know what type of interpretations could come out. So some of the examples that we are quite happy about, we expected a lot of people that dealt with typology, you know, but we didn't expect, for example, how the Chinese were interested in typology, like the South Standard architecture. You know, they're dealing with this Hutong typology and begin to transform them, or the Archi-Union practice in Beijing were infusing digital robotic technology with traditional materials and traditional types. You know, so that's something that really fascinates us. Yes, I mean, to be honest, we haven't really think about it yet. Okay. And the reason I think we have, so for some reason, I think my partner Sharon and I, we just have been trying to be not too self-conscious to think about our work, because we know that our work is really based on circumstances that were available to us. So we have been, you know, doing our project, and over time, I think after 10 years, 15 years, we look back and then we can begin to see certain patterns. But we try to be very, have this kind of justice freedom when we start a project, start with almost ground zero. So we didn't specifically think, what can we take away from the biennial, but we did learn a lot from a lot of colleagues and friends who do projects that we are not exposed to either the scale or the context. You know, so for example, Point Supreme from Greece, you know, they did this house where they really dealt with materials. They dealt with materials that are new materials together with as-found materials, and how they put together this kind of palette of materials is something that we didn't have the opportunity to be exposed to. So, but we thought that was really a fascinating project. Yeah. Some offices that dealt with a certain classicism from Europe, which are not the context that we have in North America at least. So, but we begin to see certain issues about classicism that also it's not very, classicism doesn't need to be too forbidding or very dominating. It can also have a very human side, a very vernacular side to it. So we're very interested in that moment too. Maybe it affects our work, not immediately, but maybe over time as we deal with larger scale projects. I think we can learn from that. I think for us it's always a scale issue. You know, like many practices, we start out with small scale projects, and then when it gets to a larger scale, what do? We start off with maybe a agglomeration or aggregation of small things, but it doesn't always necessarily gives coherence. So sometimes we look for larger things that begins to give a larger project coherence. I think this is a struggle for many architects. We look at Mario Botta, the great houses, and then when he started to do banks, suddenly the banks become like inflated houses on steroids. So we try to learn from that generation too. Yeah, we're like you said, we are Los Angeles-based architects, and we find a lot of our influences and impetus of our work came from Los Angeles. Although maybe it's not to a lot of people from the outside who think of Los Angeles as having a certain defined Los Angeles school of architecture. There's certainly that school, but we feel more closer to a lot of colleagues in Latin America and Europe that we find a shared concern. So earlier on in our career, I would say the first 10 years, we were not that optimistic. We felt really isolated. We were doing things on our own. I think the first time that we felt this optimism was this Ordos 100 project that Ai Weiwei organized in Mongolia, the project that didn't get built. But what happened was that over that period, we met a lot of architects whom we know each other's work, but we never had a chance to meet face to face. And after that, two encounters, I think a lot more projects begin to spawn from that encounter. So that was one of the moments where this kind of understanding, like there are good people out there who understands you, but in different corners of the world. That we begin to very naturally gravitate towards each other. So it wasn't a kind of globalism that was maybe a colonialism where you were so strong you go out. We're not like the Spanish who are out there to conquer. We're more like the Portuguese. There's no food at home. We have to go somewhere to find food. And maybe there's a certain naivete to have this type of optimism. But I think we are forever optimistic about architecture because I think the main thing is we don't overestimate what architecture can do. I think architecture has suffered from being underestimated, but it also suffered from being overestimated. And I think we're very realistic about architecture can solve all world problems. It can host the world to deal with these problems. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And I think maybe the biennial is also a reflection of that.